So today we're going to talk about how Chevron is partnering with Percepto to transform operations at scale through remote inspection of their assets. I'm lucky enough to have Katherine and Kerri up here with me today. Very excited because two people who are very well respected both within Chevron and the industry are sort of kind of jumped at the chance to come and talk about our partnership. So appreciate you being here with us. And we will jump straight into introductions. Kerri, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so Kerri Harvey, I'm an operations superintendent for Chevron out in our Midland Basin assets outside of Midland, Texas. I've been with Chevron for 17 years as a facilities engineer and operations leader. And excited to be here and talk about drones and technology in the oil field today.
I think we may have skipped past Katherine. We'll come back to you.
I don't need a picture, Sam. I got this. I'm here in the flesh. I'm Katherine Snyder. I'm Operations Digital Advisor. I support our assets in our shale and tight business. So I work out of Greeley, Colorado, but I support assets in the DJ Basin, the Permian Basin, Delaware, as well as our assets down in Argentina. And I do a lot of other digital transformation work, and drones fall in that scope.
Thanks, Katherine. And then finally, the least interesting person up here, so I'll keep it brief. So I am a strategic account manager at Percepto. Background is chemical engineering, worked with BP in oil and gas originally, and then through several software startups until landing at Percepto. But I'm going to engineer as much time as possible for you to listen to these two today, and as little time as possible focused on myself. So let's jump in. I want to frame the problem first. So all the data you're going to see over the next few slides is going to be Percepto industry-wide type analysis, not Chevron data. And then I'll kind of invite Katherine and Kerri to give the Chevron view on their kind of view of these numbers and challenges as well. So traditional inspections are costly, right? We've come up with a figure from various estimates, various data sources to say that there's around $5 billion spent annually by operators in this kind of shale and tight business on annual inspections. And this is people in trucks all over back roads in the Permian and other basins, driving between assets, difficult roads, unsafe roads, difficult weather conditions, day in, day out. So a lot of work, not particularly safe work, happening every single year. And there's a couple of factors that make us think that this is only going to increase. So two main things are the price of oil. Most estimates would have it, around the $60 a barrel mark over the next few years, and that's kind of break even, right, in the Permian, and slightly below break even on new wells and some of the higher cost basins as well. So what that drives is, how do I get more out of my existing wells? How do I sustain production of everything I already have installed today? And that means typically more eyes on site to find problems sooner and try and prevent downtime. And the second thing is, kind of no matter where the federal regulations go over the next few years with the EPA, what we see in states like New Mexico, Colorado, California, and others, is there's already a very restrictive and tightening regulatory environment pushing for more inspections, quicker repairs, things like that. So we're not seeing, and we don't foresee, a reduction in this kind of cost and challenge to the operators. And the challenge is this just doesn't scale, right? So if we look at it, you have this huge problem, teams of people in trucks driving all over roads, a lot of money spent hiring people, equipping people, insuring people, keeping those people safe. And the other problem is, in many cases, these people don't have OGI cameras, right? Some teams do, but a lot of these folks are going out there using their ears, using their noses, trying to hear and smell whether there's a leak, right? And we've already seen a lot of cases where we send the drone out and we find things that someone standing right next to it didn't know was there. So it costs a lot, and it's also not a particularly effective way of managing our assets. So Kerri, I've kind of framed the problem generally across the upstream. Could you kind of talk to how Chevron sees this and how you've been addressing it up until now?
Yeah, so we have, the area that I'm responsible for is roughly 80 miles across. I have 80 people working across those 80 miles. And so just kind of a visual here of what that looks like. So all of those little flags that I have on there are Chevron wells that are within my team's operation. There's a lot more than just those. Those are most of the newer ones. And so huge transit times, getting people across the field to respond to a call out or an issue that they may see. And just for reference, the next slide here will show from where we're at in the Woodlands, that's going down to Galveston every day to take care of something that may have an exception or may not. And maybe I just need to go there and perform my AVO, my audio visual olfactory inspection, and be able to report whether or not something is leaking. And so when in Chevron we have the three priorities. The first priority is do it safely, the second priority is do it cleanly, and the third priority is make money while you're doing it, right? And so the first priority being safety is how do we get people off the roads? So in the Permian, roughly 400,000 people live in the 4 counties that my team operates in. And within those 4 counties, there are 110 fatalities last year on the road. For comparison, Harris County, 5 million people, last year, 300 road fatalities. The Permian is about 5 times the driving risk and fatality rate compared to Houston or other major metro areas. So every mile that we can remove people off of the road, a drastic improvement in our safety profile. So my team of 80 people drives over 1 million miles per year. So if we can stop having them go to a site just to check whether or not it's in okay shape, to check whether or not we have an active leak or something has come loose or we need to work on something, and shift to a model of what I call exception management. How do we get the systems set up to tell us when we actually need to go there and action something, as opposed to just go there and check it every day?
Thanks, Kerri. So safety, obviously a huge part of this. Again, just zooming back out, so try and get people in the mind of the scale of what we're talking about. Again, Percepto numbers here. If we think about every asset, every pad in the Permian, if you wanted to go to those once a year, right? Super low ratio, this is not necessarily realistic. You're talking about 50,000 inspections, 40 people, 20 trucks. And as I scale up and say, okay, once a year is not enough, I need to go to these assets once a month because I need to do a New Mexico monthly inspection. You're talking about 600,000 inspections all of a sudden, almost 500 employees. Perhaps more realistically, you want to get eyes on assets once a week. You're talking about 2.5 million inspections, right? And then if I want to see something every single day, it just becomes a completely unsustainable number, right? So I think you're starting to get a feel for where we're at in terms of the scale of the problem, the scale of the challenge. So the reason we're up here today is that we think Percepto can play a big part in that solution. So alongside some other pieces of the remote automation puzzle, Kerri's got a slide coming up soon that talks to how we play with other pieces that can form part of the solution. But I will briefly just play a video, and I want to show you 2 minutes of what Percepto is and what we offer as part of the solution. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is AIM. So this is the central platform where we do command and control, we do data storage, data analysis, reporting, alerting, right? This is the central hub of the whole end-to-end solution. You just saw our drone in a box there. So the drone basically has a radius of around 2.5 miles, so it can cover around 15 square miles per drone in a box. And you can daisy chain those together to increase your coverage. So you can have one drone 2 bases, one drone 3 bases. Ultimately, the goal here, right, is to create a mesh network across your highest priority assets so that you can carry out all the inspections you need to without putting people out into the field. Now, we have our shielded operations waiver. You heard a lot about that. It's fairly industry-wide now in terms of how that's managed. We have our remote operations center in Florida, and we have approval from the FAA for one pilot to manage up to 30 systems. We're not doing that currently because some of the analysis that goes into watching the missions, finding emissions, reporting emissions, validating things is kind of the constraint right now. And we're going to announce shortly our AI emissions detector launch. And as that improves over time, you're going to see our ability to really scale this and see the benefits of economy of scale of one person managing 10 systems, 15 systems, where previously that was taking 15, 20, 30 people driving around the Permian. The other piece that I do want to touch on is kind of the emissions regulatory framework. So again, you'll hear a lot about the FAA side of things this week. When we get into emissions, we're talking about the EPA, we're talking about state environmental departments, We already have a solution that meets the requirements of New Mexico and Colorado Departments of Public Health and Environment. And we're entering the final stages now of getting alternate test method approval from the EPA so that we can be used for all Quad B, Quad C inspections as well. So that's obviously absolutely critical, as well as these standard operational inspections. We need to be able to use the system to do all of your regulatory requirements as well, and we're very close to having a kind of full spectrum of approvals there. So I just touched on it. We are kind of launching this week. You may have seen some of the news around it, our AI emissions detector. So this is kind of huge for us, right? Without this, you have a person sat at a screen analyzing every single video, right? You can't achieve the economies of scale that we want to. So this kind of builds on some of the work we've done in transmission and distribution. Some of our customers from that industry already have seen some of those benefits in that industry. We've been working on this for a long time. It's trained on hundreds of thousands of data sets covering a broad spectrum of emissions patterns, factoring a lot of different source types and differing environmental conditions as well. It's on the endpoint, so it's on board, and it's happening in real time to detect methane emissions and pinpoint the source based on the plume behavior. So, as I said, all findings today are validated by OGI certified people, and that's part of our kind of regulatory framework for how we manage this. But again, the goal for us over the next 12 to 18 months is to train this AI and continually improve it to the point where it is as good as or better than a human. And we can start to scale back the level of validation and increase the number of systems per person and keep improving the ROI for customers like Chevron. Kerri, can you talk a little bit around the sort of mission to 1 million for Chevron and how this level of remote automation, remote inspections is going to kind of help you sustain that production there?
Yeah, so in the Permian, Chevron announced a couple of years ago a mission to 1 million out in the Permian, which is 1 million barrels of oil equivalent a day production for all Chevron equity across co-op, NOJV, and royalty streams. What that meant for the co-op side of the business, which is where I help manage, is more than doubling our production over that time frame. So in a 2-year span, doubling production in an unconventional asset is very, very difficult, right? So the first year of those unconventional wells, you're declining 30%. And so to continue that kind of exponential growth profile over time takes very, very high capital intensive program. So a lot of wells, a lot of people, a lot of activity all across the Permian. The Permian is more than 100, several hundred miles across. And so just the full scale of the activity is kind of hard to grasp unless you've been out there and seen it. So for us, what this meant was not only doing it at scale with more activity and more people, but also chasing that cash margin. So how do I do that with the resources that I have in place? One of the things that we say inside of the MCBU where I work is drill to fill. So how do I utilize the infrastructure that I've already invested in, but get better? The safety expectations, the goalpost for that is continuously moving. The environmental goalposts and expectations from government entities, from shareholders, and frankly from our own workforce is also moving. We're trying to continually get better, and leveraging data and things like the output that we get from drone in a box and other sensors in the field allows us to do that at scale without just throwing more people at the problem, more people on the roads, more people potentially getting exposed to things in the field, and trying to do that as smartly and efficiently as possible. So this slide here really speaks to, I call it the technology ecosystem that we're trying to deploy in the Permian. So we've got our co-op production is over 500,000 BOE a day out in the Permian today across Delaware Basin, Southern Delaware Basin, and Midland Basin. And we have an integrated operation command center in our Midland office. And that has a lot of sensors and a lot of data flowing into it. We have process data, temperatures, pressures, all that kind of stuff coming into there where we have it's monitored 24/7. We have an operator sitting at the desk, and if there is a call out, they will call out to the field and send somebody out to it. We also have PTZ cameras that they can access and check on the facilities as well. And all that data comes into there and allows them to initiate what I call that exception management workflow. How do I get the right data to the right people to analyze it and make a decision on whether or not we need to take action, as opposed to having this really super broad funnel of all of the data coming in and having somebody have to sort through that data to determine what's valuable. So when Sam talked about the AI OGI gas detection model, that's exactly where we're trying to go with all of our data internal to Chevron. Is how do we get that in such a way that it makes it easy to consume, and we don't have to require additional folks to have to sort through that data and take action on it. So yeah, Drone in the Box and the partnership with Percepto and the Permian has been a very, very valuable piece of this kind of technology puzzle that's enabling our operations to focus on those high value tasks and eliminate low value work.
Perfect, thanks, Kerri. And I think, we've already touched on this several times, but the fancy hardware, the AI models, the stuff that everyone talks about really only add value if they're providing insights where the operators need them in a timely manner, right? So you can see Katherine in the control room there analyzing some Percepto data with some of the operators, right? If we just parachute the tech in and it isn't going into their workflows as and when they need it, if it isn't appearing alongside all their other remote sensors, you're just adding admin overhead and workload to people, right? You're not necessarily creating the kind of savings and efficiencies that we want to see. So again, we are tied directly into Chevron's control center. They're polling our API in real time. So anytime we find an emission, the operating center is getting a notification within around 15 minutes, and they can see there on their screen all their other high pressure, high temperature, all the other remote sensors as well right alongside it. So the data that I'm getting now is the remote sensors plus the contextual video information of exactly what's going on in the field. So I let the marketing people go wild with this one, so we're going to finally have some graphics. Katherine, can you talk a little bit to, Kerri, can you talk a little bit to like what it actually means in terms of an operator sitting his console there? What does this look like?
Yeah, and I think I've said this, maybe, I see Trey out there. Trey and I have talked a little bit before. If you just parachute a really cool technology and change nothing in your operation, you're not going to get value out of that. And so really the value is in these workflows. How do I actually change the way I work today, leveraging the technology and the data that I now have access to improve our outcomes in the future? And so that's really what that IOC is working to do, is take the load off of our field operators having to drive around multiple locations per day, be able to monitor those with the right level of automation and telemetry to make smart decisions on whether or not we're going to send somebody there, and relay that through an automated workflow system so I don't have to have people along the way kind of pushing things along or raising issues. We can kind of do that in a exception management process.
And again, everything you've seen up till now is very much the sort of visible layer. So it's the insights, the alerts, what you're seeing on the consoles. Katherine, can you talk a little bit about what's under the surface as well and the importance of having that kind of full picture for Chevron?
Yeah, absolutely. So I get the fun administrative part of these slides. So this is, I think, the part that we so often take for granted, especially at a large company like Chevron, where we say, we know what the best technologies are, we know how to deploy them, but we really don't dig into realistically that administrative side where we're looking at just the burden of how we manage the data internally, how we're doing the cybersecurity attributes, which I'll talk a little bit in an upcoming slide. And so when we started this partnership with Percepto, one of the things that really struck me early on was they had a really solid grasp and understanding of this end-to-end workflow where they knew how we were collecting the data, where it was going to come in, how they were interfacing with the regulators, what their roadmap was to Quad OB, Quad OC approval. They'd thought about this holistically, not just, as Kerri said, parachuting a drone in, and now we have this great technology, but no way to leverage it. So we so often fall flat when we're not thinking about it from a workflow standpoint, and I think you're probably going to hear the word workflow 20 more times from us, because realistically, when we started out on this adventure with Percepto, we weren't trialing a quadcopter. Everyone in this room has flown quadcopters. That wasn't the interesting part to us. We were trialing specific workflows with data-driven outcomes from those workflows. And so these are just some of the attributes of that. I think understanding even some of the cost models plays in here, where you're looking at how we as an operator purchase equipment, and then, we're going through a major reorg right now. This is all public information, but folks move jobs every 3 to 5 years, and let's just say that the guy who did maintenance on this quadcopter no longer exists. what do we do with that piece of equipment that we bought? Or the second we bought it and drove it off the lot per se, is that technology now obsolete? Or are we looking at needing to upgrade a sensor payload every 6 months? And as an operator, unfortunately or fortunately, our primary focus is getting hydrocarbon out of the ground. So how do we do this in such a way that we're still able to leverage this technology and these subsequent data outputs effectively, but not necessarily lock ourselves into a technology or a set of systems that we can't extricate ourselves from? Because we also don't know what's coming in the future, right? The regulatory environment continues to change, both from the FAA and EPA and our local regulators. And so we needed someone that we could work with proactively on some of this that really understood these administrative elements. And I told Sam I initially wanted this to be an iceberg, but he didn't like the catastrophic imagery of that. But in my mind, if I'm thinking of myself as the Titanic, the part of the iceberg that we can't see is always what trips us up. It's never that visible layer that we all have a really good handle on.
And can you maybe talk a little bit about how we translate, or how you specifically translated some of that technical success into business value, into sort of Chevron language?
Absolutely. So this was not a quick exercise, I will say this. So when we started conversations with Percepto, I think, in June of 2023, it's been a little bit, we said, let's really get a firm understanding of how we're going to measure whether or not this tool, and again, that set of workflows, is actually effective for us. And so we said, we know we can't necessarily use this for EPA compliance yet, although that is a future goal of ours, assuming we get alternate method approval. We know that we can't necessarily use this to immediately reduce our reporting burden, so let's focus on production optimization, because that is something tangible in the here and the now that we know we have hundreds of people on the road every single day trying to optimize and manage. So we have what we call operator routine duties, or ORDs, and a large majority of those are those AVOs, audio, visual, olfactory, where they're out in a truck, driving an hour to a field. This is a very real world example of where we have a Percepto box now. They drive an hour to the field, they walk around, and they look, and they smell, and they hear, and they take notes, and they send those notes back to someone sitting at a console. But why does that guy need to be out there to take those notes if we have a camera that also has a gas detector on it? So we said, let's focus our initial value drivers on that production optimization piece, with an understanding that there are some qualitative effects coming out from some of that future regulatory engagement. But number one for us was really in the health, safety, and environmental space. So reduction of drive time, right off the bat, that was an objective. We said within the first month of deployment, we wanted to get 60 hours of drive time completely eliminated. That was actually quite an easy win for us, and we've seen that continue to grow as we've reallocated those folks to other closer areas or more high impact work. We also wanted to reduce their exposure. This is kind of hand in hand. If they're not in the field, they're not going to be exposed to harmful gases like hydrogen sulfide and other things. We also wanted to identify events faster. So there's some nuance in this, because if we're identifying the events faster, you're arguably protecting yourself from what we consider LPO, or lost production opportunity. So consider that barrels not being produced. If you have an issue like a leak, you're losing those barrels onto the ground or into the air that you would have otherwise been capturing for revenue. So inherently, you're losing revenue. So we said if we identify events faster, we not only are protecting additional potential future cash flow, but we're also protecting our equipment and our assets. We're able to schedule things more proactively. We're able to run our maintenance crews more effectively, where now they're not running around doing firefighting effectively. They're actually able to schedule that work, and we're minimizing our asset integrity issues, because if we catch it sooner, we're not having catastrophic failures that lead to a full well shut-in or a full field shut-in. So there's some knock-on effects that are really kind of vague in that identify events faster, but if we can say the guy would have been out there 30 days from now for his monthly inspection, and since we're flying this route every single day, we now caught it 28 days sooner, that allows us to have some tangible and measurable impact when we're talking about things like production optimization and the values and volumes that we're looking at. We also have this qualitative measure of improved decision quality. That one is a lot less measurable, but it does resonate well with our management, we have found, and I'm going to continue to talk to it because I think it's so important and something that we so frequently miss. We have these folks sitting in this room full of consoles, and they're getting SCADA data, they're getting IIoT sensor data, they're able to optimize tank levels and things like that. They're able to look at automated well valves and throttle a valve on or off. They are able to do a lot from there, but they don't often have context. And a solution like the drone in the box with Percepto has allowed them to have a contextual understanding of what's going on in the asset as a whole. And that allows them to also make safer decisions. For example, they may choose to not blow down a compressor if they realize a man is standing directly next to it, and they have no indication of what is actually on the pad other than our cameras and our drones giving them that context. So it's a really critical component of this overall understanding of how they're making decisions around the field. So the value drivers that came out of some of these kind of conversations that really drove how we looked at this proof of concept and then eventual scale, they had to be things that were quantitative. So we do have actual KPIs internally that are measuring every single one of these because we needed for it to be tangible. We needed it either be an avoidance of a fine, for example, which is monetary, an avoidance of a personnel requirement, which could be current headcount or potential future headcount. So all of these have a metric assigned. I'm happy to talk about what those are a little bit more offline because there's a lot more we want to cover, but really in-depth exercise, I hope you can tell, that went into this value driver conversation.
Yeah, and I do want to say, you can probably tell from how she's speaking about it, Katherine's been absolutely critical to our success at Chevron because she really understands what it takes to deploy technology and operations end-to-end, and the amount of time that went into developing some of these models and success metrics before we'd even signed a contract and building like a 2 to 5 year plan of how this could scale. Was really a case study in how you go and deploy technology in a large enterprise. So Katherine, can you walk us through a little bit of how you did that?
You bet. So again, more administrative fun. We are a large company, and as such, we move quite slowly at certain things. And so I wanted to go into this partnership with a crawl, walk, run approach where so often I find we fall flat if our operations group, like Kerri, feels that a technology has been thrust upon them without that fully fleshed out workflow. So again, I know I mentioned this before, but we treated this as a proof of concept of the workflows, not the technology. And we actually had 2 different POCs, one in the Rockies and one in the Permian, that were gauging different attributes of the workflows, one specifically focused on Colorado leak detection protocols, and one specifically focused on our Permian Basin production optimization. And we did that intentionally to say, yes, this is the same solution and the same technology, but we're benchmarking the actual workflows and the metrics that come out of that so that we can gauge the outcomes. But behind the scenes were all of these other attributes of engaging, I'm going to say over 20 stakeholder groups. I'm looking at quite a few of them here in the room. But a lot of this was an administrative exercise ahead of the POC to make sure that if the POC was successful, we were able to scale rapidly. Because oftentimes what happens is we'll bring something in as a POC, operations will say, oh, we really like that. We'd like 20 more. And we go, oh, okay, whoa. Now we've got to do this cybersecurity exercise. Now we've got to do all this vetting. Now we've got to do contracts. We'll see you in 2 years. And by then, Kerri's moved on to bigger and better things. And all of a sudden, the next person goes, I don't want that widget that you've been working on for the last 2 years. So we were really regimented in checking some of those boxes ahead of time, working through what a detailed contractual model would look like with a long-term MSA, with a longer-term service model, understanding what pricing looked like at scale, understanding what enterprise benefits there were, what partnership benefits there were, understanding Percepto's regulatory roadmap so that we knew that we were partnering with the right organization who was going to work with the FAA and the EPA in the way that represented us effectively as well, because we work a lot with those orgs and we don't need a partner org going out and doing something contradictory to all the work that we're doing. So there was a lot of that up front before we even got the POV or the POC actually deployed and installed. I'm thinking the cybersecurity step alone took us 9 months, and that was it was production ready is what they call it, when it was time to actually look at scale, and we didn't have to go through this larger exercise of, is there data coming through a Chevron network? How are we storing the information on the cloud that we want to pull down for our internal AI in the future, or things like that? So lots behind the scenes. We are now finally at a point where the 2 POCs that we initially started are running very effectively, I would say. And we're looking at scaling opportunities. And now because we did all of this behind the scenes work, we have the ability to talk about that a lot more fruitfully and not have to go back and kind of have this weird waiting period in between.
Perfect. And that's kind of where I'd like to end today as well, is translating some of the theoretical value that we've just talked about into actual numbers. So Kerri, do you want to if you can you walk us through some of the numbers from the value look back that you did on the Texas deployment?
Yeah, so last year, mid-year, we deployed Drone in a Box with Percepto in our Violet asset, and we did a benchmark before. So we had somebody ride around with our field specialists and say, let's log how much time you're spending on all these different activities, see how many events we are reporting, how many things you're responding to, and then change the workflows, implement Drone in a Box in concert with our Integrated Operations Command Center and autonomous operations through that system, and do a 3-month kind of before and after snapshot of what did we do differently and how did that improve us. Probably the single most impactful thing that I can talk through right now is we changed our staffing model. So prior to this, we had 4 operators working out there full time. So they would work a 8 and 6 schedule. They were back to back, and so you had 2 in the field at all times, and you had an overlap day where you had 4. We reduced that to 2. So we didn't reduce the head count. We didn't let those other operators go. We put them as optimization field specialists. And so when we had these workflows identifying exceptions that we need to take action on, that was their job, was to go do the high value work as opposed to drive to that particular field every day and do an AVO inspection on the hundreds of wells and dozens of facilities that are within that field. So very, very impactful. That actually reduced drive mileage by 50% for that particular section of the field, right? I take 2 of those field specialists off of that field, and they're able to go do other work. A lot of potential emissions findings. So as Sam mentioned, the launch of the AI OGI
Emissions detector.
Emissions detector. Being able to see those leaks when they're small, and in many cases, I think we had probably 5 or 6 cases. The OGI camera would flag, hey, there's an emission out here. We would call the field specialist, have them go do an AVO inspection, and they would come back and say, there's nothing. I don't smell anything, don't hear anything, don't see anything. There's nothing. So we're like, oh, okay, we'll fly the drone back over there and check it. Sure enough, yep, there's still an emission. And we would have to get to a very, very high level of inspection to finally figure out the issue and then go fix it. And those were things that were invisible to us before. And now that we're able to see those on the fly, we're able to plan that work, as Katherine said, more efficiently, and obviously reduce the impact, the environmental impact that comes along with them. So a lot of emissions, potential emission events detected during that 3-month period. We had 16 that we actually identified and responded to in a much faster fashion than we would have otherwise. These fields are not manned 24/7. I have a day shift, they work 10 hours, and then I have a night operator, a single operator for that 80-mile area, 80-mile diameter area, that is only doing exception management. So if the IOC sees something, they will call that operator out to check on something. Otherwise, they're not doing ORDs or AVO inspections at night. And so when the drone is able to do night missions or day missions even, and identify those issues before they become exception management, that is a huge win for us. And we had 16 of those in that 3-month period. And then 1,000 hours plus of baseline operator duties eliminated. Able to put those 1,000 hours in that 3-month period towards high value work, not driving what I call windshield time. We pay our field specialists very well for their knowledge and their experience and their capabilities. And when we're paying them to drive to a location, it's pretty low value work. And so we want to make sure we're maximizing their time and their value.
Perfect. So thank you, Katherine. Thank you, Kerri. Really appreciate it. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I want to make sure we've got plenty of time for questions.
Great discussion, Katherine and Kerri. What were your keys to success to get your field team not just to adapt, but to adopt this technology? The psychology behind working with field team members are often challenging.
Yeah, this thing had to look like help. And so, a lot of times when we talk about technology, folks that have a vested interest in keeping doing what they've been doing are afraid of technology. This thing's going to take my job. This thing's going to come in and take over parts of my job that maybe I enjoy. Maybe I enjoy driving around the field. And so what we talked through with the field specialist was how much do you actually enjoy not doing value-added work? And what we found was our field team wants to optimize. They want to improve the operation. They care. They want to see the operation do better financially, environmentally, and obviously on the safety side. And so they were actually excited. Once we kind of talked through, what is this going to do? What is this going to enable us? And again, we sold this as, and truly mean it even to this day, this is not a headcount reduction exercise. This is to take the resources that we have and make sure they are working on the highest value opportunities. And we've been, upfront and honest with that all the way through, and they've embraced that mindset of saying, we're not doing this to reduce headcount, we're trying to reduce your exposure and make sure you're working on the highest value stuff.
I'll add to that, Kerri. I would say that Kerri in general runs a very technology open team in the field, which not everyone is. And so we intentionally worked with Kerri initially as the first POC because he's had a high success rate in other technology adoption. So we said this is going to be additive, not an additional distraction on top of those things. And the guys in his field really do pride themselves on being those early adopters. They get to kind of show it off to the other guys on the other teams and say, look at the things we're doing. And I think one that was really striking, because I still expected a bit of a barrier to adoption because the whole, robots are taking my jobs mentality. And so I went in with this large deck one morning to give like a change management talk to them. I was prepared for some pushback. And we have what we call the IOC, the Integrated Operations Center, and we've been working through some change curves there as well. And so previously, with this exception management framework, they would see an issue on SCADA or an issue from a gauge, and they would immediately call a field specialist and say, hey, so-and-so, run out there and go look at this thing. And so the guys were starting to feel, in certain cases, like they were being run a little ragged by the IOC. So I'm showing them this drone, and I'm showing them what it's going to do, and I'm showing them how the IOC can talk with the Percepto team to launch it to go look at an issue. And this old-timer in Kerri's team raises his hand, and I'm like, oh, here we go, okay. Worried about this, and he goes, you mean when the IOC sees something wrong, they can just launch the drone instead of me having to run out there? And I said, yeah, that's exactly what that means, sir. And he goes, well, thank God. And I was like, okay. So he kind of set the tone for the rest of that conversation, but it was really cool to see that early understanding of like, this means that I'm not going to have to be doing as much running around while we work through the rest of the change of building in more automation elsewhere in the ecosystem.
In your workflow, how do you integrate what you're doing with your land group as far as how does this affect easements, access? Who do you have to contact as far as going out and crossing these properties, especially at night? Is that something that was difficult? How did you do your workflow in order to handle that?
Difficult is a word I would use. So we did all of that very carefully up front, and it is, as you know, for anyone that's been in the Permian, it is a case-by-case basis. There are some landowners that are extremely drone effective. They have drones that they run their cattle, they have drones that they have on their property. So we also thought about that when we looked at the two initial POC locations so that we knew we'd have a lower barrier to entry with those landowners. But there were some agreements we had to make even for safe landing zones where I currently pay, or I have paid a $1,200 fee to a landowner for us to have an emergency capability to land on an open part of their grassland, and they just had to agree to not ever park a tractor there. So we said, hey, this is gonna be flying. The good news is a lot of the ranchers out there are running crop dusters and drones for their own use anyways, so they're pretty accustomed to having aerial oversight for things that they're doing, and they want our wells to be run effectively. A lot of them have mineral rights. A lot of them have a vested interest in us staying on their property. So it's pretty symbiotic in the places that we're working, and we've been very effective about making those inroads early and engaging them in that process. We never go in and say, hey, landowner, we're gonna be flying over your house with this drone. But we do have also some legal precedent with the Texas Supreme Court rulings around drones over the last 5 or 6 years that do give us some level of eminent domain. Not that we would ever invoke that, but for oil and gas inspection, there is some legality around how we are able to utilize airspace for aerial surveillance. But typically, once we do that landowner engagement, walk them through those protocols, make sure that they understand what we're doing and why, they've been all for it, and we have yet to encounter a landowner that has pushed back on us, especially if they're making a little money out of some of the safe landing zones.
I think the other case too that I would mention, this particular location is a high fence exotic game area. So we have some pretty robust gates that the field specialists and contractors have to drive through. Those gates malfunction. So one of the selling points for the landowner is like, hey, we're going to use this drone to also keep an eye on that gate and make sure that gate is closed so your exotic game are bottled up and where you want them to be. So trying to find, like Katherine mentioned, a symbiotic relationship, try to figure out how can we make this work for them as well so that, again, they're bought in as opposed to being resistant to it.
I think Sam thought I was joking when I asked if the drone could find zebras. I was not joking.
AI on that coming next.
The emissions AI piece was very interesting. I'm just curious, do you guys have any other agentic AI analysis tools like vegetation, fence line, deviation detection, equipment damage after a storm, anything like that that can automatically analyze the data and give an alert to the operator?
Yeah, the two other things we have right now out of the box, one is transmission and distribution lines, substation inspections, where we have AI around thermal hotspot detection. So we do a lot of work with that. That was kind of the forerunner of everything else that we did. Only other piece that I can think of off the top of my head is more around the construction monitoring side of the piece. So we do a lot of work with solar companies and a number of objects there, trackers, modules, foundation piles and stuff like that. We have some automatic AI built in that can count progress over a construction schedule there as well. So yeah, kind of three pillars there. The emissions detections, the big one we're announcing this week, and then T&D and solar, the other areas.
Just a quick question. This sounds, I just applaud you for what you've done, and I like to hope that every NOC and IOC in the world will, watch this video, and, because you really did soup to nuts. My question is, it sounded like it went so smoothly. Did you have any real challenges along the way? Because, it just sounds like, you guys, I'm like, is this like a punk session with Ashton Kutcher? Because it sounds like it went off like, so there must have been some challenges here and there. I'd just be curious as to what they were, and it sounds like you handle a lot of the cultural issues, which I always say is half the battle anyway. So I'm just curious as to.
Yeah, I think scale was the big, the sheer scale of Chevron and the time it takes to get things done. For me, was probably the piece that is the most challenging, right? I think especially as the org goes through changes, we're working across multiple states, multiple different regulatory authorities. Katherine did a ton of work, as you can see up front. And even with that, right, there's just a ton of challenge in navigating an organization of that size. Katherine, anything you can think of in terms of big ticket challenges?
So many. I'm glad it looks good. That means we practice this very well. I would say the time is a big one. Operations time versus kind of internal technical organization time. They're moving on very different time scales, and they have very different drivers. Where we need something right now, we have other groups internally that are rightfully focused on further time horizons and really understanding kind of the robust ecosystem, but Kerri still needs a thing right now. So there's a natural tension there, and trying to manage that while still getting something out the door to deployment and managing the growing pains along with that, because there are absolutely growing pains. Every day we would approach it as a new challenge where we'd say, okay, today a bookmark came in and we couldn't tell what the bookmark was for. What are we going to do about that? Or today we had 5 bookmarks come in and they came in seamlessly, but nobody in the IOC responded. Are they even getting the alerts? What's going on? So it's been very iterative. We approached it with the IOC as you guys are in the driver's seat as far as how you're actioning this data. You have to work with us every week. So we have 3 standing calls every single week. We've got one kind of overarching office hours on Monday afternoon. We have one MCBU specific calls where we talk KPIs, we talk installation, we talk scale. We have one with the Rockies business unit where we do the same thing as we do in MCBU. But that's not an easy lift. So that's at least 3 hours a week where we're collectively sitting down with Percepto and talking through these ongoing challenges of even just getting from the POC to scale. So it is absolutely a work in progress. It always will be. And I think because we framed it that way, it's been well received. We never said, we're deploying this perfect thing. Again, we're not trialing the technology, we're trialing the workflow. We knew it was going to be messy and sticky. It absolutely has been. But I think because we led with it in that way, it's been well received.
So you mentioned 2 regions or areas that y'all were doing as proof of value. How many Percepto systems did y'all deploy for those 2 regions? Was it just one in each region, or was there multiple?
So there's 4 systems out there right now. So up in Colorado, we have a slightly wider distribution. Things are a little more spread out. And we have 1 drone, 2 bases down in Texas. And then, Katherine, maybe I'll let you talk a little bit to where the next kind of focus areas are a little bit and the drivers for that.
Maybe Kerri can talk to that a little bit with his new job.
Yeah, so currently operations superintendent in Midland Basin, Texas, and I'm actually heading over to be the asset manager for our New Mexico assets starting July 1. But really trying to look at where does this fit the best. So our more remote locations, longer drive times to get to. And so, I mean, I think in our Midland Basin assets, I have 2 new development areas with new central facilities and wells coming online this year that we're looking to deploy Percepto in, and 2 more areas in our New Mexico assets, and 1 more in our Delaware Basin, Texas assets here within the next probably 12 months or so.
It really helps us. We like to say we're a fast follower. I say we're a medium-term follower, but it really helps us where other companies have hedged some of the risk with the regulators. So another operator was very successful in getting the New Mexico Environmental Department, the NMED, on board with leveraging Percepto for their environmental reporting. The CDPHE in Colorado is very similar, although that was driven by us. So places where we already have that existing regulatory reporting relationship, along with the ability to do production optimization, that's a slam dunk, because then we have the opportunity to not just optimize all those value drivers I showed you about, but also really lean into the regulatory side and find a new value case that we really haven't even started to capture in monetary terms.